You are listening to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, welcome to the podcast. In case you're new here, my name is Arlena and I'll be your host. I have been drug and alcohol free for 29 years, married to my adorable husband for 26, and we have raised two young men that I'm really proud of. After spending 10 years as an account executive in Silicon Valley, I have dedicated my life to helping busy women quit drinking and create a life they love by addressing root cause issues in a private and safe environment. If you aren't making the progress as fast as you would like to, you can set up a free discovery call with me by visiting soberlifeschool.com to see if coaching is right for you. Today, I'm speaking with Jason VanRuler. He is a licensed therapist, coach, speaker, and author of Get Past Your Past: How Facing Your Broken Places Leads to True Connection. I had so much fun talking with Jason. He's actually really funny, but we also covered a lot of ground in terms of finding practical solutions to the challenges a lot of us face in recovery. We're going to talk about why we sometimes replicate our family of origin, how to forgive your parents, and how to build confidence. We also talk about relationship dynamics and how to move from dysfunctional roles like being the rescuer, the victim, or the bully to being the coach, the survivor, and the encourager. The framework is actually very practical and can shift your perspective very quickly. There were so many gems in this conversation. I know you'll walk away with something that you could apply to your life today. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Jason, and please feel free to reach out to me on social media and let me know what you think. Well, Jason, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. You were so sweet in rescheduling. I'm sure I had some kind of drama and I had to reschedule. I don't remember what it was. Isn't that funny? How
It's very big in the moment and then it's gone. And then you can't even remember.
I was like, why? What happened? Anyway, here we are. And I'm so happy to be talking to you. We are going to talk about your book, Getting Past Your Past: How Facing Broken Places Leads to True Connection. And man, as soon as you told me the tagline, I was like, of course. But it's not easy to wrestle with those broken places. So I'll be very curious to hear your methodologies and practices, things that we can do to sort of wrestle with those things and really start creating the lives that we love, creating the connections and having the life experiences that we want. But I like to play a little game called the lightning round at the very beginning, just to kind of front load the episode with some resources. When you first started your recovery journey, let's say, was there any books that really spoke to you that helped you in the beginning?
Yeah, one that really impacted me that I actually recommend a lot would be The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. One of my favorites. I think also that and Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Both were books that were super impactful for me.
Yeah. Man, The Four Agreements. Which one do you have one that you wrestle with the most?
Oh, probably the not taking things personally.
Oh, that's mine. That's what I was
Yeah,
going to say.
it's all personal. Everything is about me and it's always personal. So I've had to really wrestle. Just like, I'm sure that has something to do with me. And that's, joking aside, like that comes out of our woundedness as children, right? Because that's how children view the world is if something bad happens, a child's sure they had something to do with it. And so if we have some of these long-term wounds, we can have this belief that if something bad happens, it's my fault. And as an adult, we kind of laugh and say, like, well, that's silly. But I think as kids, sometimes we really have felt that growing up, and we really have felt like it's something that we did or didn't do.
As a therapist, would you say that we have these experiences where something happens, like my parents divorced, and I took it personally. I decided that if I had only been good enough, that they wouldn't have separated, dad wouldn't have left. And then it becomes a story about who I am. It's assigning moral meaning. It's like, I'm bad. Right. And I feel like a lot of people sort of have that root cause belief of I'm bad. Is that something that you see a lot when you're working with people to overcome their past?
No, I've actually never heard that one before. And working with all
Stop
kind
it.
like you're the first. Oh, this is
I'm
such a
I'm
surprising
so
day.
unique.
This is very interesting. No, I mean, so many of us have that because again, as kids, like we don't have a lot of ability to have insight and awareness. And so we're just making it up as we go.
Yeah.
And if it's always about us, then if something bad happens, it's often about something we didn't do or a deficiency that we have. And so if the thing is bad enough that happens, we internalize that something is fundamentally wrong with us. And
Mm.
when we do that, we adopt that as kind of a core belief about who we are. And what's interesting is the people who do things like that and they interpret that belief about themselves usually end up being highly successful people. And the reason is they're trying to outwork what they think is
Yeah.
a problem that they have. And so they work harder than other people, they're more driven, they're all these things, but they struggle all the time to be content. And they say,
Right.
well, why am I not content? And it's because what fuels us can fool us, right? So what fuels us is a belief I have to perform or do to be okay, but it can fool us into thinking if I work hard enough, I will be, when it's just not true.
I feel like this is going to turn into a therapy session for Arlena.
I did start billing. So I will just
Oh,
send you an
okay.
invoice in the mail. It'll be great.
Man, that is, I mean, you are telling my story, and when the man's search for meaning, it kind of ties in because, our brains are like these meaning making machines. It's like, why? Why did this happen? Like, why am I an alcoholic? Why did I suffer with addiction? Like, why? It's like, what are but it's easy to get lost in that, the whole analysis paralysis or victimhood thing. How do people work out of that the work I was identifying, oh, workaholic, overachiever, always trying to prove through my value through performance, which is a roller coaster, right? Because when things are clicking and things are producing, then I feel great, and if things are not happening or I hit a wall, then my self-esteem goes down too. So can you fix this, please?
I don't know. They didn't teach us the answers at therapy school. We only have the questions. We do not get. Well, I here's what I would say. For one, every
Come
time I
on.
read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I always think like, boy, he'd be a tough guy to complain in front of, just because his story. If he's
He's
asking
in the
how you're doing,
Holocaust and he survived.
he asks you how
Yeah.
you're doing. You're like, traffic was really bad today, and I hate the weather, and you just feel like, oh, I can never tell Victor anything. So there's that. But I think a lot of, the work that we have to do is just instead of doing, we have to switch to being. And
Ooh.
and so many of us struggle with that because we're just doing all the time.
Yeah.
But if that's fueled by this brokenness or this faulty core belief that we have, we will never find satisfaction in it. And
No.
and so we have to learn how to be. And for some people that's really hard because we've literally spent a lifetime trying not to do that. And so this invitation of like, well, just be you, sounds really scary and loaded. It's like, I don't know that I trust this isn't a trap. You really just want me to be me, even though I'm broken. And so when we can kind of get to that place and say like, yeah, this is me and I'm okay with that, suddenly the performance thing carries a lot less weight in our life.
Yeah, I find that doing my own work and working with other women, it's that initial question of who are you? Like when you say being, it's like, well, who is that? And so it's like the three fundamental questions, trying to answer that, like the who am I, what do I want, how do I want to spend my time? Those are like a lot of times, like it's easy to kind of find yourself in that place of like, well, who do I want to be now? Like, who am I now? Because we're constantly evolving. I'm in my mid 50s, and it's good to periodically sort of ask these questions because I'm just in a different phase, and it's a challenging question, especially if you've been so outward focused to then go, what is it that I really want? That can be a really tough question.
Yeah, and if we're so outward focused, we often answer that question with the question, "Who do you want me to be?" So who am I? Who do you want me to be? I will be anybody. I will. What do you need me to like? What do you need me to do?
A
Which is,
chameleon.
yeah. Then we get into those like dependent relationships and those things that are really unhealthy because we kind of say like my value is going to be earned, and so you have to tell me what to do to earn it. And so it
Right.
seems way too simple to say like, oh, what if you just didn't make it weird and do all of that stuff and you just showed up? And we're like, no, that's way,
That's the
way too
weird part.
easy. Yeah, it's like, well, that couldn't happen. But the truth is, like, when we learn to live in that space, things get easier and we start to have a lot more contentment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I love that. Those are two great books. Thank you so much for those. Um, do you have a go-to mantra or quote that you live by, something that has meaning for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a Mark Twain quote that I really like, that talks about the best way to have success is to get started, is the gist of it. I'm totally butchering the whole thing, but the gist of it is just do something. And so
Yeah.
if you were to work with me as a client, you would hear me just always saying like, well, and what are we going to do about that? So I am always looking at like just what's the next step you can take. People
Yeah.
have asked me, they said, how'd you build a social media following or write a book or do any of the things I've done? And I just am like, I just did the next thing.
Mm.
It's not that I'm some brilliant person or was born into something. Like I just did the next step and it led me here. And I think if we can lean into that and accept that and do it, like we often get to where we want to go, but where we get stuck is we make it way too big and then we don't even get started.
Yeah, I could see how like in my own life, like the next step feels too big, right? And it's so nice to be able, like when you have a coach or something, they can help you break it down to small steps, like micro steps. And just sometimes those little micro steps help you build momentum.
Yeah, well, you get confidence. I mean, you get the confidence from keeping your word to yourself. And
Mm.
so the more that you do that, the easier it gets. And, I'd argue we never probably get to exactly the spot we want to be and never feel just how we want to feel all the time. But you have to take those little steps to build that.
Yeah.
It's if you don't have confidence, sometimes that's because you're not doing anything. And so it's really hard to have confidence if you don't do anything. If you were to play like I was at the gym about a week ago and these guys were playing pickup basketball and this guy just like walked in the court. He'd never really played. And he's like, I don't feel confident here. And I thought, you shouldn't. Like you shouldn't feel confident at all. This is like there should be no confidence
That is
because you haven't done
accurate.
this. Yeah. And so sometimes I think we go, well, there's something wrong with me if I'm not confident.
Uh,
And sometimes I say like, well, what have you done to feel confident?
yeah,
Now, if you walk out there and you've practiced for the last 3 months every single day, you feel different.
right. Yeah. Did he end up playing?
Yeah, it was terrible, but we're all old, so it was fine. I mean, somebody
Sure.
probably broke a hip and we were fine. But it just really
You're
made
so
me
funny.
think like how many times I've thought in my own life, like, oh, I wish I were more confident without really thinking about like what I'm doing that would actually lead to me feeling confident.
So good. What a gem. That is really good. I love that. Do you have a regular self-care practice, whether it's like a daily or weekly? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I get up usually about 5 a.m. Just because I heard that's what people who are successful are supposed to do. So I get no sleep and I get up at 5. And then every morning I do meditation through the Headspace app,
I love
which is really
Headspace.
helpful. I've been with them for a really long time.
So
Um,
are you just picking random ones or do you go through like the sequence ones?
Done it both ways. I've done a lot
Okay.
of their courses, but then I also just do like because they have guided and then they have kind of a step under guided where it's like kind of half guided. So I'll do that.
Mhm.
And then I do like a devotional app that's important to me. And so I'll do that. And that has a meditation attached. And then I do kettlebell swings because I think if you're already up that early, you should make yourself miserable by swinging a kettlebell. And so I like to do that. I like to do that, but it kind of gets me moving around and thinking a little bit and just kind of being in the moment. So I find when I do that, I have better days.
Hey, I didn't know that you're a part-time comedian.
Yeah, I'm working
Yeah,
on it. I'm
this is
working on my
hilarious.
routine. Yeah,
This
I'm
is
working
good. I
on it.
like it. I like it. Tell me about your devotional app. Is that spiritual based or religious based or what
Yeah,
is
so it's religious. It's Glorify is what it's called. And they walk you through like a passage and then an interpretation and then there's like a 5-minute meditation. and they've been around for a while now. And there's a guy that walks through it, and he is British, and Andy from Headspace is British, and so I'm just trying to keep a theme going. And so
They
that's
sound
how I start the
smarter.
day. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm like, these people know what they're doing. I should
yeah.
really listen. Yes,
They sound really smart.
they sound really smart.
I love that. And I love the idea of doing something that sucks in the morning. That's kind of are you familiar with David Goggins at all?
I am. Yeah. I've read his book. I learned some new swear words, which was awesome. That was very helpful
Nice.
to me.
Yeah.
But he's like a guy that really gets that, is the
Yeah.
more hard things you do, the more hard things you do, and
Yeah.
it just builds. So I love that.
Check it out. I just learned something. I don't know if you've ever listened to the Andrew Huberman show. He's a
Yeah.
nurse. Yeah. So he just had Goggins on, and they were talking about how when you do something that you don't like, that's difficult for you, there's like an actual part of your brain that gets larger that helps you to do things that are harder. So
Mm.
as you continue to do things, because even I'm sure even the kettlebells at some point becomes routine and it doesn't suck as much as it used to. And so the idea is that like we switch occasionally so that if things become rote, you do something else to kind of switch because it like builds that part of your brain. Like there's an actual part of your brain that gets larger. And I was like, that is amazing. David Goggins must have a huge brain because
I had a huge brain in my 20s. I did a
did
lot of stuff in my 20s I
you
didn't
did a
want to
lot of
do.
drugs.
And so I must have had a huge brain. That is
Well,
great.
yeah, yeah. Well, maybe it'll grow back.
Maybe it'll go back.
Maybe it'll be like your tonsils. Your
They'll,
tonsils,
they'll come
your,
back.
your liver
No,
will
but
come
I
back.
love just doing the thing. And so like with that, I do 75 kettlebell swings. I just see how far I can go before I have to stop. And then I break it into sections. And then when I can do all of them, I up the weight. So I'm always trying to like push it a little farther because I
Okay.
feel like if I
Yeah,
do
that's
that and I
fun.
beat my number from the day before, I feel good. Like it's just kind of a win for the day that we
Yeah,
start off on.
yeah. And just showing up is actually the win. So even if you don't break the number, I would imagine that just
And it takes
the
5 minutes, so it's not like a big time investment.
okay, that's not bad.
Yeah.
Looking back, I mean, you've come a long way. We're going to get into your story. What would you tell your younger self that was just starting to get sober?
Yeah, I think kind of like we talked about actually is just to take small steps
Mm.
and that the people that you walk those steps out with will matter more than you think.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, because I think it's so tempting to just think like it's all on us, so we have to do that, and if we do all the right things, we'll get to the right place. And the truth is, I mean, sure, that has a big role in it, but our community matters just as much. And
Yeah,
so if you're trying to walk out the right steps in the wrong community, you're going to have a heck of a time.
yeah, no kidding. Well, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. I'm always curious about, the beginning, like family of origin, childhood stuff, because I feel like that sets the stage, like we were talking about earlier, these misconceptions that we get when we're younger, these maybe limiting beliefs about who we are, our worth, our capabilities in the world. Maybe you can just share a little bit about how things started for you and how we got here.
Yeah, so things started great. I would say they were awesome. I was born into just like a middle class family in South Dakota, and so we had all the things. I was the first kid on my street to have a Nintendo, so I think that's pretty awesome. And then so things were awesome. I was like 8 years old and already destined to become a therapist because I was journaling at age 8 in my little corduroy pants and Bass Weegens. So I was definitely destined for
Did
this
you have
work.
like sold patches on your elbows
I
and tweed
totally did. And I still do. And I love it. And I'm not sorry about it. It's just
Yeah,
me. I've
that's
always been a
funny.
70-year-old man. And so I journaled, I want to be a therapist and I want to write a book and I want to have a practice. And so it was seeming like everything was going to be great. And then literally within months, my parents divorced. And
Oh,
they didn't divorce in like the nice, hey, it didn't work out sort of way, but it was sort of like the scorched earth, we hate each other's guts sort of way. And
oh,
so we went from like this very idyllic childhood to then moving. I think we moved maybe 15 times after my parents' divorce. So we went to like this really chaotic volatile. There's lots of moving, there's addiction, there's trauma, abuse, all those things. And it just kind of felt like, wow, I didn't see that coming. And so got out of high school and I did the thing that every angry teen does, where I just said, like, I'm never doing this. I'm never coming back. This is so bad. And then also did like lots of teens do and just simply recreated the system on my own. So I'm like, I'm never doing this. And then I went to college and then started drinking a bunch, doing all the wrong stuff, and dropped out. And so really within like a couple of years, I had replicated the very thing I was running from.
Why do we do that? That is so bizarre.
It's because it's what we know. It's just like we don't think outside of what we have grown up with. And that's not to say like, oh, you should blame your parents for everything, but it's just to say like, we're getting an education in our childhood about how the world works. And if we get one that we don't like, it's a real challenge because we have to learn something new. Otherwise, we'll replicate it.
So this idea of blaming parents seems to come up a lot because there is a need to, you know, hold someone responsible, right? Like we have this need for validation. It's like, I was really hurt by, you mentioned addiction. Who was wrestling with your addiction? Was it one of your parents or?
Yeah. So close to me, right? So then we go from like, it's great. And then some alcoholism and addiction. And you just go, okay, yeah. And so to your point, like, what do we do with that? Because, you don't want to blame your parents for everything. And yet sometimes bad stuff happen and people have to be accountable.
Yeah, I feel like even in my own recovery, there were times when I was like, I did not feel safe growing up. You didn't validate my feelings. You did just the opposite. You used your anger to control me. I felt hurt by some things and I needed to express it and I wanted validation for it. I didn't really ever get it, but there was that need to let them know that that I was hurt by their decisions or actions. But at some point, it's that idea that it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, I have these feelings. How do I then resolve them with or without your cooperation, right? A lot of times we're not going to get our parents' cooperation.
Yeah. I think too, a lot of times we're kind of in our culture and society right now, we're definitely a proponent of therapy. And so I think there's been a shift in how we maybe would handle that conversation. But I think our parents and our parents, like that was not on their radar. In the 1980s, nobody's like, hey, how do you feel about your parenting? And like that wasn't a thing. And so I think it's hard. I have kids and I'm like, oh man, I hope they don't hold me responsible for anything. And yet they probably will, right? They probably will. And the good news is I've got lots of friends who are therapists. I'm like, I will hook you up with somebody. But I
How old are your kids?
I've got a 13, a 10, and an 8. And so I'm just like, I don't think you can be a parent and get out of parenting without having that. And it would be kind of ridiculous to think you could.
It is ridiculous. So I had a friend, I remember when I first, my oldest son, he's almost 24 now, but when he was a baby, I was so worried that I was going to ruin him. And I had a girlfriend go, Arlena, nobody escapes childhood without some issues. You're guaranteed.
Absolutely. And if you're like, well, I did it perfectly, that's its own problem, right? I mean,
that would be total
it's
insanity.
like, yeah, that's a whole nother thing. So I think it's, there's a great therapist, his name is Terry Real, and he talks about this idea of just we're naming, not blaming. So we're just like naming what happened. We're naming what we didn't get. We're not saying like you did this and now I'm a bad person. Like it's just naming it. And so I think if we start there, that's a little more objective conversation where we can kind of speak about what's happened and work out from that place. But I think when we go to the blaming, that's really challenging because it essentially says, I'm helpless and continue to be. And as adults, we don't have to be anymore. We may have been then, but we don't have to be today.
Yeah, that sort of perpetuates the victim mentality, which I really cannot stand.
It's not super helpful. I mean, it's a lifestyle, but it's not super helpful.
It's not helpful, but I have found that it's actually a very powerful position to be in because it's almost like the sickest one in the relationship is the one who controls it. And even if you don't mean to be, or don't want to be the victim, it's a tough mentality to kind of get out of, because it's, taking responsibility is very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is not my favorite thing. It is that it's not my favorite thing at all. There's a guy, and you may know about this guy, but he's a psychologist, I believe. His name is Stephen Karpman, Karpman. But he's got what's called the Karpman triangle, and it basically says that in every relationship, if it's unhealthy, we all gravitate towards one of three positions, and so one of those is the rescuer, and the rescuer rescues victims, and the rescuer rescues victims, but always with an agenda. So it's never like, hey, I'm doing this, but there's no strings. There's always strings. Okay, so that's the rescuer. Then there's the victim, who they don't control anything. Life just happens to them, and bad things happen. They can't do anything. And then there's the truth teller, who's cynical, who's the bully. And so Cartman said, we're the rescuer, we're the victim, or we're the bully, and we move around in that triangle. And so what he proposed is that there's a healthy alternate. So the rescuer becomes a coach, right? And a coach is different than a rescuer because they empower other people to get healthy, but they don't do the work for them. A victim becomes a survivor, which is to say, I survived that. I've got agency, I've got control. And the bully becomes an encourager. And so they speak the truth, but with kindness and love. And so I think when we get in that victim space, like, it makes so much sense. And certainly some people have had such horrific experiences. I can see why they would feel that way.
Yeah.
But the truth is that only holds you in that place. Being a victim just holds you in that place forever. And so what I try to help people do is move to more of a survivor stance, which is to just say, bad stuff happened for sure, and this is what I'm doing about it.
Right. No, I love that. I love that idea. When you were talking about the truth teller becoming an encourager, it kind of reminded me of that idea that honesty without compassion is cruelty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea. And so compassion, Brene Brown always talks about how empathy is the antidote to shame. And I think the shame is really kind of at the root of being a victim. Like, if I were different,
Absolutely.
this never would have happened to me.
Yeah, there's usually a deep wound there. I mean, because what's
Hmm.
true is they don't want to feel that way either. That's not an ideal place for anybody to live.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, and that's a more compassionate look at the victim, is that they have a deep wound. For sure. I also heard of another sort of triangle where there was a rescuer or a victim and then the persecutor. So the bully is kind of like, that's kind of what represents the bully,
Very similar. Yep. Yep.
because
And
it's
so
the
that
truth.
might even be an adaptation. I mean, therapists, psychologists, we can only think in shapes. So if it's a shape to explain something, it was probably one of us, right? It's like there's a
Yeah.
circle. There's every time with my clients where I'm like, let me draw this triangle. They're just like, okay, all right,
Another
whatever.
triangle.
Here we go again. Fine, Jason, draw the shape, explain it. I get it.
Yeah, shapes are very helpful. That's funny. Okay, but back to you a little bit, because so you go through, how old were you when you started? Was it alcohol, drugs? Like, what were you using?
I
All
was
the
kind of
all
equal opportunity. I mean, I didn't want to limit myself. And so alcohol was
open-minded.
really the biggest problem for me.
Yeah.
And then where that led was just, once I would have too much to drink, after that, kind of open for ideas and suggestions.
Right. Yeah. And what was it? Did you have like this moment of clarity or a process where you came to the conclusion it's like something needs to change?
Yeah, this is going to be super cliche, but I'll tell you anyway. I literally had this moment where I had just said, okay, I'm gonna be this different person. I declared all these things, and then had dropped out of college, was living in an apartment I couldn't afford. My car's about ready to be repoed, and I'm hungover, and I walk by the mirror in my apartment and I see myself. And I know it's a little cliche, but like, I literally saw myself and just thought, like, I hate this person. Like, this is terrible. Like, how, if I got to build anything, this is what I built. Like, how did I do this? And so I would like to say in that moment that everything changed, but it really didn't. It just planted a seed. And what that seed was is, if I don't do something different, I basically have a crystal ball and can tell my future. Like, I can, in my early 20s, I can call it for the rest of my life because I've seen it happen. Or I need to do something. And so I think within that, that seed started to grow a little. I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't like I made big changes the next day or something, but it was just this idea of like, oh, I just don't want to keep living this way.
Yeah. what was your next step?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think from that place, I tried just as best I could to get it together. But again, I was trying all on my own. And so if I was great at making decisions, I wouldn't have been in that spot. So the problem was it's, you call her stinking thinking or whatever, but it was like I had gotten myself into that. And so it was unlikely I'd get myself out. And so some time went by and I met my now wife, but I met her and really honestly, like for the first time in my life, somebody loved me enough to hold me accountable. And
Mm.
it just sort of won my heart. I mean, I thought she was just the bee's knees. I was all about it. And she's like, hey, Jason, you're super cool. And I think you can do a bunch of stuff, but like, you kind of have to pull it together. Like, this isn't going to work otherwise. And for me, that was probably the first time in my life somebody ever said, like, oh, yeah, I love you, but like, this is completely unacceptable. And
Wow.
it really just stuck with me. I was like, oh man, okay, well now like maybe I should try to do something. And so that was, and I think that's for a lot of people, but that was the catalyst for me to start leaning in and doing some work.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like we have the idea, but sometimes we don't have the incentive or the leverage over ourselves until, there's something about having accountability, like looking into the eyes of someone else and actually seeing yourself to be like, okay, I actually have something to lose if I don't change my behavior. So that was the catalyst, and that's so sweet that she saved you.
Yeah, which is also what therapists tell you never to do, by the way. So
I
that's
know.
any
Yeah.
therapist is like, don't ever do that, Jason. You shouldn't tell people. But I'm just going to tell people like that's how it happened. And that for me was interesting because I was woefully unprepared to care for a healthy relationship. So there
Right.
was a huge learning curve, right? It was like, well, I want that. And now what do I do? And so one thing about me that's kind of been true my whole life, and I was probably a very annoying child, but I will just ask people how to do things. So I've never really lost that. And so for me at that time, I just started asking people around me, like, how do you be sober? How do you make good decisions? How do you be in a relationship with somebody? How do you do all these things that I'm really not good at right now? And I know sometimes people say, well, that's too simple, but literally, that's why it worked is because I
Mhm.
just got really good at asking the questions to people who were willing and able to answer and then doing what they told me.
Taking direction.
Yeah, because I mean I wasn't doing a great job. So I was like, hey, I got myself here. You seem to know what you're doing. So how do I do some of that? And
So
along
did
the
you
way, yeah,
did you find somebody who was sober and you said, how did you do it? And then
yeah,
how
yeah.
did you
I
find
just
somebody? Did you do
um
did you go to rehab or do 12 step or anything like that?
no, what the deal was is so I've been a sales guy really my whole life. I've been interested in sales and networking. And so my first thought was kind of like, who do I know in my network who's doing
Mm,
the stuff I want to do?
mm.
And I had this idea about so often nowadays we don't have role models. Like I see people
Right,
all the
right,
time and I'm
yeah.
like, who's your role model? They're like, I don't know. And I'm like, who's your role model as a couple? And they're like, we don't have any. And like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of going to be rough. So for me, I just went like, who would I say are the people who like would know how to do this? And
Mm,
then I asked them. And sometimes they would say, well, here's what you do, or here's what I did. And other times they'd say, I have no clue, but you should talk to so and so.
okay.
And so I just kind of became a student of what do I need to do and who do I need to ask to get there.
Mm,
And that has just been a lifelong thing for me that I still do it today. Maybe people listening to this, I go on Instagram and I send, usually 5 to 7 messages a week to people just asking, hey, how do you do this? How am I a better podcast guest? I might ask that question to somebody.
mm.
Or how do I do this? Because I think if we don't know, we don't know. And there's no shame in that, but then at least ask somebody.
So who was your role model for stopping all the things?
Yeah,
12 step or
I
whatever.
had a couple. The one that stands out is actually a great friend today. And he's a therapist and just has been a fixture in my life, really for most of my life, although not nearly as close as we are today. But he just seemed to have this presence about him that like he didn't have all the answers, but he was kind of like me and like, well, let's figure it out. And
Mm.
so I just leaned into that and that expanded my network and expanded my network. And then as you know, pretty soon you're surrounded by a community of like-minded people trying to do the thing.
Yeah, yeah. Were there specific practices or, I mean, it sounds like you always had journaling, but what did he suggest to you to do? Like what kind of helped you?
Yeah. So for me, faith was important. So that was a big driver for me. When I started to get healthy, I had, I'm a Christian, but I had like major beef with God. So that was number one, is
Same,
like, ooh,
same,
got to probably
same.
figure that out. And so that was kind of his recommendation. And then meditation has been a game changer for me. And so I just started to do that. And I was like, I don't know how this works, but I'm going to do it. And so I did it. I also ran, which I always have liked running, but I got into running, would run a lot. And for me, that's kind of an active meditation. And so those things really helped me to get my head on straight.
I love that. In 12-step communities, they talk about there's a lot of talk of higher power, and step 11 is prayer and meditation. And there's something magical about exercise. It's like the best, you know, best kept secret for being like an antidepressant.
Yeah, you shouldn't. You're going to put me out of business. Please don't say that. Yes. Yes, but it is true. I mean, and research has told us that. Like research says, hey, literally, like the results are similar to taking an antidepressant.
Yeah.
And so I can remember going from being a guy that smoked cigarettes to running within like a 3-month period of time. And I'd be running on the bike trails and stop and think, it'd be good right now. A
A
cigarette would be
cigarette.
pretty great. Yeah. And so, but I just kept running. I just kept running. And so I was like, don't do that. Just keep running. And then I found friends that ran. And so the other part that I tell people is you build a community around the things you want to keep.
Ooh,
And so for me, that was running, that was my faith, that was meditation. Like I built a community around the things I wanted to keep.
I got to write that down. That's going to be the clip.
Great. That's perfect.
Things you want to keep. Yeah, because I feel like in the beginning, when people are, coming to this idea that they want to quit drinking, it is actually a process of redefining your identity. Like I used to be the party girl. I was the wild and crazy one, or I was the funny one, or you know what I mean, like along those lines. And when I, stopped drinking and doing drugs and all that, it was like, well, who am I now?
Yeah. And
Turns out, yeah, I could still be all the things, but not in a destructive way or in a way that I would regret later, because I used to regret things.
after the fact, you're like, maybe I wasn't as funny as I thought.
I used to wake up the next morning and I'd be like, what was that all about?
That joke wasn't as funny as I thought. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what happens is that we wrestle with our own identity, and sometimes we're strong enough to be open to changing our identity, but then our community is like, hey, wait, remember who you are. You're the funny
Yeah,
drunk one. And
yeah,
so if we change our mind, but we don't change our community, they're going to keep us stuck in the same spot,
it's true.
because
Yeah,
they're going to say, hey, remember when you did that? And so many people notice this, right? Like if you decide to quit drinking or do whatever, and then you go around those friends, like they go, well, hey, real quick, how do we relate to each other again? Well, let me remind you of the things you did that you're trying not to do. And you're like, okay, yeah, well, let's talk about that. But eventually you see like that relationship is kind of like go this way or that. So
yeah,
either I do more of the same or I change the people. And so what I'll just tell people is like, you don't have to change the people. You just have to invite them into a different relationship,
right.
and they will or they won't, right? Sometimes you'll be shocked because they'll want to change too. And other times
Yeah.
they'll just say, it's not for me. And you just go, okay, I get it.
I have found that the people who want to join you were your true friends anyway. They were the ones that would always support you anyhow. And the people who were sort of married to the bad version of you, or that's a kind of a weird way to put it, but you know what I mean? It's like the version that you don't want to be anymore. They fall away anyhow. And they were always going to. Those are not sustainable relationships anyhow. So I know a lot of people are like so worried about that, but your true friends end up being the ones that would have stayed by your side through thick and thin anyway.
Yeah. And they don't have to like it. Your true friends might say like, hey, we're in it with you. We think this is weird. We don't know why you're doing it, but we love you. So we'll meet you there. So like, that's
Yeah.
okay. Like they don't have to love what you love, but your real friends will say, okay, if it matters to you, it matters to me. The
Yeah.
other ones are kind of those fair weather fans, right? Where they're like, well, that team's lost a couple games in a row and I don't like the color of the jersey anymore, so I'm switching, right? And
Yeah.
so those people, like, that's fine. But then they're probably not going to help us get to where we want to go.
Exactly. Yeah. That's really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your book. I love the title, Get Past Your Past, because um, it feels like a lot of times, so there's this thing, dissociation, right? Like sometimes the things that we wrestle with are so ingrained in us that we don't actually realize that they are a problem, but then they show up in funny ways. Um, for me, it's like, oh, it's always like workaholism. I always thought that if you got addicted to exercise and work, you'd be rich and in great shape. Turns out,
Well, sort of. I mean, sort of. There's another part to that story, but yes, sort of.
Yeah, yeah. It turns out you can work for free for a lot and still be like very busy. And that always comes back for me to this idea of, why is it difficult to receive or ask for what I'm worth? And then that always goes back to childhood. So it seems like all roads lead back to where did the origin of the wound come from? So maybe just walk me through your book a little bit and, like, why did you write it? Were you seeing things repetitively that you were like, I got to put this all in a book? How did the book come about?
Yeah. So the book, the book has been since I was 8 years old, I think, is what I wanted to do. But this book specifically for me was a couple of things. I think for me, it was a little bit of a celebration of like some of where I've come from and some where I'm at. So it's like, wow, that's been my own journey, which was pretty cool. And so wanting to share about that. But the other part is when I first became a therapist, I worked a lot with people going in and coming out of prison. And I really just developed a heart for them because it's an underserved community. It's a bunch of people who don't get a lot of breaks. And so I just loved working with them. And what I noticed is that they don't have a lot of access to mental health. Like that's not an abundant thing for them. And so as I built my practice, what's happened is I've gotten to a place where now I work more with top performers and founders and executives and celebrities and all that good stuff more than I work with people going in and out of prison. But it's been on my heart to make all of it accessible. And so I just thought, like, if I was going to think of a book or write a book for a person who's struggling, but they have $20 and a little bit of hope, what would I want to tell them? And that was the book. That was literally it. I was like, if you got $20 and a little bit of hope, I'm going to give you everything you need to take a couple steps towards something better.
Yeah, it's amazing how, books I feel are so undervalued, right? Like you put all of your best thoughts and ideas into a book for $20,
Yeah. And
right?
now I'm out. Now I've got nothing. I mean, that was literally it. I'm just empty.
You are tapped out of fresh out of
I
ideas.
got nothing to say. Not for a long time. That's it.
Well, it's so interesting because everybody feels like they're unique. Their situation is unique, and it is important that we have a safe space to name it. Like you were talking about, there is such power in just naming it and having a safe person to name it too. I feel like it's really part of the important part of the healing process. Like we need each other. Like just sometimes reading a book isn't enough, but that's a great start. But let's talk a little bit about, you sent me a really nice cheat sheet, let's call it, chapter 7, Feel It to Heal It. So tell me a little bit about why it's so important to listen. Sometimes trying to feel it is really hard because of things like dissociation, or like I spent a lot of time in therapy talking about stuff. So I like became desensitized to it. So it was kind of harder to feel those feelings. But tell me why it's important to, like feel things like grief or sadness or loss to heal it.
Yeah, because it's natural. I mean, it's a natural thing that we do, and somewhere along our path or our, getting older, we teach ourselves not to do it. Or we do that weird thing where we're going to cry and then we like hold it back and give ourselves a headache. And we're like, this is somehow better than crying now that I've got a migraine. Because we just learned like we shouldn't do that. Or maybe a parent tells us not to cry or whatever it
Don't
is.
cry, don't cry. Yeah.
Yeah, don't do this. It makes me uncomfortable. And so I think for us, like we then say, okay, well, if I just ignore it, then it's not there. And the truth is like, yeah, it's totally still there. And so we can either feel it or it can totally drive our behavior.
Yeah.
And so both are uncomfortable, both have consequences in their own way, but
Right.
one of them leads us to the life we want, and one of them leads us to a life of coping. And
Beautiful.
so we need to feel those things. And I know every time I say that, clients are always like, oh, it sounds great, Jason. Yeah, I would love to take some time with you to feel my feelings. That's the most therapist thing you ever said. You and your penny loafers, I'm not interested. And yet, if you don't, how else does that come out? Because it comes
All
out.
sideways.
It doesn't disappear. It comes out. So then look at your life and say, like, my not feeling this comes out as blank. And there is something there.
Do you know where I see it? Where I notice it in myself is whenever a response is disproportionate to the situation, I go, ooh, that's not about the situation. That's old. Like I recently just had somebody in the immediate family, the two of them like have this huge blowout and over something very minute. And it's like, whoa, y'all are not going to talk because of that thing. But then because we know what we know, it's like, oh, it wasn't about that. It was about all the stuff that they've been suppressing. It's like a volcano, right? It's like you shove it down and you shove it down, and if you don't deal with it, it eventually explodes, right? And there's a lot of collateral damage in the form of people that we love, the people
Absolutely.
closest to us.
Yeah, I call that the sunburn. So if you've ever had a sunburn, like me, I'm sunburned all the time. If I
You're a little
see
pale.
light, if I see light,
You look
I'm
like you need
actually
some sunscreen.
I'm sunburned right now. As a matter of fact, I'm getting
Winter.
burned sitting in front of the computer. But if you've ever had a sunburn like on your shoulders and you wear a t-shirt so it's not obvious and someone touches your shoulder, you do the big thing, right? You're like, that hurts so badly, and the person's like, what was that about? I just touched your shoulder. And
Yeah.
you're like, well, because I'm really sunburned, because that really hurts. And so
Yeah.
I think we do that, right? We do that in life where we go, I'll just put a t-shirt on it. I'll just put a t-shirt on it. It's just gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And then somebody bumps into it and we have this wild reaction and they're like, what is happening?
Yeah.
Well, it's because they touched that spot.
Yeah, I think of those as like soul bruises, right? It's like we have these interactions with people and we absorb pain but they're invisible, right? And then whenever somebody bumps up against one of those, we freak
Oh,
out.
we let them know. Yeah, we tell them.
Yeah, and then I can tell you that in my own life, when I've done that, I walk away and I feel like I'm the asshole. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I feel terrible. And so I know from years of practice that, time does not heal all wounds. The pain waits,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it often comes out sideways. So it seems logical to want to deal with it head on rather than have it come out in a way where we're out of control.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Or we have to cope with the pain, because sometimes that's what we do instead.
Yeah. So we were talking, I'm going to refer back to your book. So in chapter 11, you talk about characteristics of a safe person because there is power in vulnerability, but we don't want to be vulnerable with just anybody. Like I have learned that there were certain, like my mom, God bless her, she was a very happy person. The one thing she couldn't do was hold space for my pain. And so
Mm.
I learned not to bring that to her because she couldn't do it. Um, so I had to find people who were safe. And sometimes it's trial and error, but how would you guide somebody into finding a safe person that you can be vulnerable with?
Yeah, you want to do that incrementally. So I think what happens a lot of time is we've been really hurt by people. We're a little cynical. And then we say, okay, Jason, fine. I'll trust somebody. I'm going to trust this person with everything. And then you just kind of word vomit. And then the person doesn't work. And you're like, see, this is why I don't do this. And so
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
I want you to avoid that. Let's not do that.
Okay.
And so instead, we just say, like, here's a couple things we could look at. Are they willing to help me? Because a lot of people can help you, but not everybody's willing. So are they willing? Do
Willing
they
to learn.
have, do they have some experience around the thing I want to
Ability.
ask them? Yeah.
Ability to help. Okay.
Yeah. Do they have an agenda? We would hope they don't, right? Other than to keep our best interests at heart.
Yeah. Ooh, that
Are,
one might be confusing because I identified as the rescuer, and sometimes I do it so that I can feel comfortable. or that I can
Okay.
feel worthy and I'm just going to tell you how it
Well,
is.
that's honest. Hey, from one rescuer to another, welcome. There's a club. We meet on Thursdays. It's great. But yeah, you ideally want to find someone who is just like in it to help. Like that's their thing. Like there's no strings. They're not trying to get you to do something. They're just like there. And then someone that's going to be honest with you, even when it's
Mhm.
hard. And to
Honesty
do
with
it,
compassion.
yeah, to do it kindly. And then that person who is a good listener too, and they give you space to be you, and they actually like
Mm.
that person.
Mm.
And so if you think you have someone in some form of that, then you incrementally start to let them in. So
Okay.
you kind of say like, hey, here's sort of the roundabout of what's going on for me, and you see how they respond. You don't say, hey, I want to tell you my deepest darkest secret. What do you think? Because again, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we're not so good at guessing.
Oh,
And
by the way, what
so
was your last name?
it's like, well, I've done that. I've been like, hey, let me tell you all my secrets. And the person's like, I don't even know who you are. I'm
Oh
just the
my
attendant
gosh.
at Chick-fil-A. And so I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I need to qualify people. And so you want to just kind of say, like, okay, as much as my heart wants that connection, I have to take it slow because I'm worth taking it slow.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like sometimes we are just so desperate to be heard. It's like you hold it in for so long that you're like, okay, I'm finally ready to talk about it. It's like it rushes out. Like I used to find that like what I needed to say sometimes would just rush out and I'd just be like, ooh, did I just make it weird? Sorry.
Well, I'm always like, well, I know I feel better. I don't know about anybody else, but I feel a lot better right
Thanks
now.
for that.
Yes. Thank you.
No,
I got to get going. I've got an appointment. Take care. Yeah, I
yeah,
feel great.
here, hold my baggage. Yeah, it was so funny because, I was heavily involved in 12-step communities and I was sober for a long time. And I'm a trustworthy person, but sometimes people would come to me and then they would tell me all these secrets about other people that I knew. And I was like, I did not sign up for this. It's like you need to ask permission before you hand somebody your secrets.
Well,
Some
because
of
it
us
matters.
don't want
Yeah,
to
because
know.
it matters. Yeah, and not everybody is going to be in a place where they want to receive that, and that's okay. And
Yeah,
and so not to plug therapy, but sometimes that
love
first
therapy.
person you do that is a therapist, right? Because therapists are kind of bound to be safe people. We're not always, and we're flawed, and all that stuff is true.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, if you have the means, a therapist is a great first person because when
Mhm.
you do that to a therapist, they're gonna be like, "Oh, this is just a Tuesday," right? Like they're just gonna say, like, "Yep, you are the third person today that's done this, and let's work through it." And so it's a safer place to practice. But ideally, what I always tell my clients is if I do a good job, I want to teach you how to have community that helps you with this so you can
Yeah.
do it out there on your own.
I think peer support is super important. Like I always did both. I think from right when I joined the 12 step, I immediately started going to therapy. It was hugely helpful. And I did have this one person in my life, it was peer support, tell me she suggested that we not use names
Mm,
because that kept the focus on me and like what was going on with me because it would be so tempting for me to when I was complaining about somebody that hurt me or that I was having a problem with to be like, let me explain this person to you to justify my reaction. And so she was like, oh, let's not use names. I thought that was genius because I was like, oh damn, now I
it
just have
is,
to
but who likes that? Nobody likes that. That's a terrible
listen.
idea, but it
Yeah.
probably helped.
Yeah, it was really an interesting experience because yeah, it put all the focus on me. But no, I've been lucky to have like really good I've done like process therapy and IFS therapy, cognitive behavioral. I did EMD. I did all the things because I love me some therapy. It's just it is uncomfortable, but like these were really safe people that allowed, what they did is they would create a safe place for me. So safe that it allowed my stuff to just bubble up. Like I didn't have to reach for it. It
Yep.
just
And they
allowed.
know where you're going, right? So like they also facilitate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often say that in my own coaching that I make people cry for a living.
Well, we're all proud of different things. But sometimes that's the thing people need most, right? Is they
Oh
need
yeah.
they need to be able to feel some of that. And
Yeah.
so I always tell my clients, like, well, this is the best place to cry ever.
Yeah.
Because literally I have Kleenex boxes every 5 feet. So you're
Yeah.
safe, you're
Tears are
covered.
pain, tears are pain leaving the body. So that's amazing.
Absolutely.
No, I really feel like we could sit here and jab forever. At least I could try to get some more free therapy out of you. But if you sounds like you're available to help people, how do people find you on the interwebs, and how do you work with people?
Yeah, so I do coaching, I do therapy, but probably something that a lot of people do with me is I'm known for doing intensives. And so an intensive is just kind of where I meet with somebody for a day, 2 days, or 3 days. And I do that for individuals and couples. And we really just get to the heart of whatever the issue is.
Mm.
And so that's a thing I've been specifically trained to do. And I've really built a practice around it. So I kind of fly all over the world actually doing intensives for clients and couples
Wow.
because it just changes hearts. So a lot of times we talk about like how do we get a heart change versus a head change, and
Yeah.
it usually comes outside of just an hour by hour. It's about spending a lot of time together, and so I do those. And then Jason VR is my website. And if you are listening to this and you're thinking like, oh, this guy's voice, I wish I could hear it every day. Surprise, you can. I'm on Instagram. I post daily, near daily, and so I do relationship tips there.
Okay, so you mostly focus on people healing from relationship issues?
It's all relationship issues. Yeah. So what I found is at the end of the day, all of our stuff is about how we have a relationship with ourselves and others. And if
Yeah,
we can figure that part out, we're okay.
I love it. Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time today. You're super funny, but also really rich content, which I appreciate so much. So thanks for hanging out with me.
Hey, this was such a good conversation, and you were funny too. So this was great. I
Thanks.
had an awesome time.
Yeah, we'll talk real soon. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.